My name is Matt Culpin. I work for Jadu and Spacecraft. I'll explain what these two entities are as I kind of go through today. Spacecraft has become its own entity as of last Friday. It's basically grew out of Jadu, it's its own sort of design agency, but I'll kind of explain that. So I'm born and bred Leicester, lived here all my life, apart from a few years in London. And I actually graduated from Leicester Poly, so that's showing you how old I am. I joined Jadu in 2010. I was employee number 29, and now there are 85 employees. So we've grown a lot in 5 years. And Jadu had also grown a lot in its previous subsequent number of years. And we started out in this building, which isn't there anymore. It's actually on Queen Street. So if you know the Leicester Mercury, it used to kind of face that place, and it was knocked down. And Suraj Kika, the CEO of Jadu, founded Kika Multimedia in 1998. That was the same year I also founded Untitled, so Untitled design agency that's been in Leicester for a long time, and I ran that for 12 years. I found out when I first started at Jadu that Untitled was actually one of its first customers, and Untitled were working with a company called Winsor Newton, who make artist materials and paints. And we needed a stockist store locator, and a friend of mine, a guy called Richard Chamberlain, who's Suraj's brother-in-law, was a bit of a whiz programmer. This was way before the web had any kind of dynamic pages. It was very static then, and we needed the ability to be able to search for stockists for Winsor Newton, and that became Jadu's, well, Kika Multimedia's first web project that enabled a kind of a very simple CMS interface into some data. And so that kind of really started out Jadu's kind of adventures with content management. And I only learnt that after I sort of left Untitled and joined Jadu, so it was quite nice to have that sort of full circle effect. So in 2003, we outgrew that building. In fact, because it was being knocked down, we had to sort of move, and we went into the LCB, and Kika Multimedia became Jadu Limited, which was essentially the name of its product. So it created a CMS platform, and Jadu is what it was called. We had lots of fun at the LCB. We kind of, obviously the LCB is really only there for startups and small companies, but we kind of outgrew our first office. We then had a whole floor. We then had another office on the other side, and then eventually, just as I joined in 2010, we then had another office over at Phoenix Square as well. So we kind of become a bit disparate, and the need to kind of become a whole team and be in one building was born out of the fact that we needed to find a building. So we're now at the Meridian. So if you know where the Observatory pub is, the Meridian, we're right next door to that. There's a big building. We were kind of rattling around in that for a few years, but now we've kind of pretty much filled it out. We've now got the headache of where do we go next. So it's been an interesting journey, and I'm going to kind of sort of talk through some of it. So these are our days at LCB. If any of you are based in the LCB, you probably recognise these things. So we've been around doing what we call enterprise CMS for 15 years. So one of the first customers after Untitled was actually Kettering Borough Council, and they're still a customer, I'm pleased to say. And that kind of gave Suraj the idea of, well, we've built this for one local authority, can we sell it to another? So that became the kind of strategy. We then hired a salesperson that had previously worked for IBM. We thought that was a good thing, and obviously got experience in local government. And he opened a few doors, and we now have 80 local authorities around the UK. So something's worked from that point of view. We're kind of seen as the go-to people for local authorities, which is a good and bad thing. Because we power lots and lots of parts of government, we've had to obviously build a stable and secure infrastructure around their hosting requirements. They are organisations that are under attack every single day from hackers. Anonymous came out sort of a year ago and said, we're going to target local government, probably because they see it as a soft target. Lots of our competitors have been affected by this. They've had sites brought down for like weeks. In fact, one of our big sites that we power, Manchester City Council, had a denial of service attack 2 weeks ago. The same hacker was quite open about it. He also brought down Greater Manchester Police in the same attack. But fortunately, because of the robustness of our infrastructure and hosting, we were able to sort of stop that within about 5 minutes. So effectively, the site wasn't affected for very long, and it was in the middle of the night anyway. Because of the nature of local authorities, they don't have a lot of money to spend. They always try and scrimp and save on everything that they do because they're obviously under pressure because of austerity, all those sorts of things. So we have to build capability for them to, sort of have burstable bandwidth on their sites, mainly because, some of our Scottish authorities, they have a single server, probably 3 or 4 times a year. They get heavily affected by bad weather. And the BBC do something nice where they say, go to the South Lanarkshire website and see what schools are closed. And of course, everybody does that and it brings their server down. So we've built the capability within our software to allow those organisations not to have multiple servers, but to be able to kind of turn on areas of their site to be static, and also share the bandwidth that we have within Rackspace. So they're the sorts of things that we do. Because of the nature of local authorities, we've had to kind of make our offering accessible as possible. So everything that we do is born around being accessible from a design standards, and obviously meeting WC3 standards is our bare minimum. We're constantly mentored by companies like AbilityNet and SureTrust who come and mentor our designers on accessibility best practice. So it's really at the heart of everything that we do. So the platform consists of 3 main elements. So we have content management system, forms, and what we call CXM, which is a relatively new product, which is customer experience management. Channel shift consultant. Has anybody heard the term channel shift before? Channel shift is really about enabling organisations that have lots of interaction with citizens, residents, and moving them onto a digital platform. So, for example, the Leicester City Council has a contact centre. People go into that contact centre. They want to pay their council tax. They want to get a parking permit, those sorts of things. They might ring up about those things. Those transactions have a cost per transaction, and usually face-to-face it's around £40 because you're paying for that person to talk to, you're paying for the infrastructure they're sitting within. A telephone call is usually about half that, about £17, but of course online it's a matter of pence. So what we do a lot of with our customers, particularly in local authorities, is that we go into them and we analyse really where those sort of big transactions are, what are their key things that people are doing when they call them, when they ring them up. And then we help them sort of build a business case around buying Jadu platform to help them realise those savings. I've got a case study on Manchester City Council which I'll talk about. So within Jadu we've had the design capability for a long time. When I came from Untitled, it wasn't really something that Jadu sold as a kind of a product. It was very much people came to us because they wanted a CMS because of its features and functionality, and the design piece was kind of pretty much bolted on the end, and from my perspective that was kind of the wrong way of thinking really. Having obviously owned and ran a design agency, I was very much on the championing side of what design can do. So we've built a big design capability inside Jadu, and as I said, as of last Friday we've now split those 2 companies to become separate entities, mainly because Jadu needs to focus on the core of its software. We have a team of engineers constantly enhancing the features. We've removed big upgrades from Jadu. So, we used to release a version every 2 or 3 years. They had major sort of enhancements, big features. The problem with that is that, the local authorities are very slow moving. So when it came to upgrade, they had to build a business case. So we've eradicated that and we now do continuous releases. That basically means every 2 weeks there are things coming in our software. So it's almost kind of like that WordPress function where you just go upgrade and it kind of does it automatically. It means that our customers are having the constant, sort of updates of security patches, but major features come within that. We also used to have 2 flavors of Jadu. So we had a what we call a LAMP version, which is PHP, and we had a .NET version, which is a Microsoft Stack version. The reason for that is because lots of our customers probably had in-house capabilities for one particular flavor of programming. And we felt that we were probably limiting ourselves by just having one particular flavor, which was our preferred, which was LAMP PHP. So we sponsored a project, which the name is Phalange. I wasn't around at Jadu, so I can't tell you why it's called Phalange. But we open sourced essentially the ability to compile PHP into .NET. So we were able to then go to the market and say, we now have 2 flavors of Jadu. If you want a .NET version, you can have a .NET version. So that kind of ticked a lot of boxes for us, and it was able to grow a lot of our customers because of that. However, what we found is that a lot of those customers, even though they had .NET skills, never developed on top of the Jadu platform. So they were basically paying for this sort of version of Jadu. It wasn't more expensive, but weren't ever realizing the benefits of it because they were just, getting us to do those tweaks. So as of last year, we made a bit of a brash decision to kind of end of life the .NET version, which potentially was going to alienate a lot of our customers. But the upside of that, or the flip side, was the fact that we'd gone to a continuous release. We couldn't really carry on doing that for 2 versions of the software. We only really could do it for 1. And I'm pleased to say that pretty much all of our customers that were at .NET have now migrated to LAMP, and are quite happy the fact that they're on a LAMP platform, and they're getting continuous releases. The other thing that we have to do is also integrate with lots of back office systems. So local authorities have huge amounts of disparate systems. So, Leicester City Council will have one system, Leicestershire County Council will have a completely different system for paying things. So of course that means we have to build a lot of diversity in the platform to be fairly open and be able to integrate. And so therefore what we've kind of really built is the kind of a bespoke development service, which is kind of around integration and particularly solution architecture. As of 3 years ago, we got rid of our salespeople, which was a bit of a bold move. We had 4 people that were customer facing, outward bound. They were incentivized by commission, and they only really chased the customers that had money. So of course the people that might be just delivered a project and were quite happy for the next few years probably didn't really get that much of a contact from us. And we ran what we call an outreach program. So everybody inside Jadu had the responsibility, whether you're a developer, whether you're a project manager, a designer, or you answer the phone, or you sort of with the office admin, you had the responsibility of calling every single customer and asking them about their experience of Jadu. And a lot of it came back was, well, it's great, but we never see our salesperson, or when we see our salesperson, he's just trying to sell something, or account manager, I should say. They became a bit of a barrier, really. So the upshot of that is, over a period of time, salespeople kind of come and go. So as they went, we didn't replace them. And we've actually grown a lot in the last 3 years since we got rid of our salespeople. So now anybody that wants to buy Jadu or is interested in what we do gets to speak to the people that build the software, that design the software, and it's made a huge difference. We've also introduced what we call Academy Days. So these are user groups, essentially, where we host them about 4 times a year. We have a big spread across the UK, so we generally do it in London, the Midlands, North East, and then Scotland. But we have customers travelling all the way from Edinburgh all the way down to Canterbury and so on and so forth. And basically what we do is we look for sort of customer stories within our customer base. They come and present. We come and tell them what's coming inside Jadu. We've opened up our roadmap. So what we allow people to do is essentially feed into development of the software. So everybody in our customer base can say, we really have this great feature. They have the ability to vote for it on our support system. And if enough people vote for it, it's then built into the software. Because we have no salespeople, it also means that we have to be really good at supporting our customers, because they all speak to each other. They all go to the same sorts of conferences. And we encourage site visits. So one local authority might be considering to buy Jadu. So we'll say, go and meet some of our other customers, and they spend a day with them. They see what they've done, how we've helped them transform their business. And it's a really great thing. So our customers have almost become our salespeople as well. And that's been quite a revolutionary thing. We also, about 3 years ago, actually probably 4 years ago, introduced a thing called WeJot. Now this was a kind of a mobile app approach to delivering content on the web. We had lots of customers that weren't really ready to go to a responsive design. They'd probably just maybe invested a lot in their web platform. They weren't going to reinvest to go responsive. They were also probably thinking, do we go down the native app road to provide some of our services? So these are things like reporting services. So if you're a citizen in Manchester, for example, and you notice there's a pothole in the road or some graffiti, some dog fouling, which was quite popular, you could actually go to the WeJot app, which was something essentially branded as Manchester City Council but powered by WeJot, and click a button. It would take find out where your location was, take a picture, and then basically report it to Manchester. So it's very much a kind of a stopgap really between a native app and a responsive website. The problem is that we felt that because the nature of using these apps and services were the fact that you needed a live internet connection, there was no real point of doing it as a native app because you needed internet connection to be able to report something. So we thought, let's just deliver it through the web. And of course, obviously, over time, as responsive website design became more prevalent, usage of WeJot started to drop off. At one point, I think we had lots of local authorities using it, not even Jadu customers. We also ran a hack day with Suffolk County Council, where essentially we came in and said, well, here's the platform. We're opening it up. It's kind of open source based. Anyone can develop on top of it. But the outcome is essentially a look and feel like a native app, but it was actually delivered via the mobile web. And we didn't expect a whole bunch of kids to turn up, but we had a school turn up with a bunch of kids who were obviously doing programming. And this one particular lad, guy called Tom O'Brien, who we now employ, developed this school closures app. So the council, Suffolk County Council, had opened up some data to allow them to essentially take a feed of school closures when they, so if there was bad weather, which schools were open and closed. So he wrote this brilliant little app, and he won a prize, and then we offered him a job. It gave us the thought, well, maybe we can use WeJot to kind of use the platform as a teaching method for schools. So we now have about 3,500 students around the UK using WeJot, being taught as part of the curriculum how to develop for the web, essentially. It's using web technologies. And also about 3 years ago, one of our other customers, the Alzheimer's Society, again, big organisation, they were running lots of events. So they have a thing called the Memory Walk, which is essentially like a run for life where lots of people get together and raise money. And of course, their website at that point wasn't responsive. So getting people to donate on a mobile was quite difficult because it wasn't a particularly great experience. So we built a connector reliant upon PayPal. So it's kind of using the PayPal API and delivered it for the Alzheimer's. But then we thought, you know what, let's just open it up. So every single charity now has access to the WeJot donation platform. And I think to date, the Alzheimer's have had about £30,000 of what we call micro donations. So these are like £5, £10. Essentially somebody sees somebody running in a park, they want to make a donation, they can actually scan a QR code on their the vest, and they're taken to this and they can just donate something very, very quickly. But because obviously responsive website design has kind of really become the main thing over the last few years, we're seeing less people using WeJot. So rather than sort of keeping it as a platform where we charge for it, we just opened it up and essentially it's free to use. WeJot actually came out of what we call one of our innovation days. So every sort of 3 months we hire the Space Centre and we send all of our developers there, and basically it's kind of a hack day. So we ask them, what are the challenges that you feel our customers have, what can we do to answer that? And we get lots of interesting things come out of this. We've also started to try and move, which is, I say try because it's quite difficult to also do it because we've got clients that want projects delivering, is to move everybody to 20% time. So 20% of their time is spent on their own thing. It could be something that they're building for Jadu, it could be something they're building for themselves. But it means that, we're not sort of just slave drivers getting people just to work on our stuff. People can have their own things. And we've actually now got a guy, Tom, who actually worked on the WeJot platform, who's now created this thing called Hey Update, which you actually can go and have a look at. And it's basically about giving teams an update on what they're doing. Integrates very nicely with Slack. It's actually a paid for service, but this is something that he's developed in his time at Jadu during his 20% time. One of the things we also did, when we first sort of, I don't know how technical you are, but I'm not that technical. But our developers, or our front-end developers using CSS, were desperate to use sort of a SAS framework. And we found that a lot of the open frameworks that were out there didn't quite do everything that we needed to do. So we built our own, which we call Orbit. And it's got to a point now where it's that well-rounded, we're actually going to open source that. So again, that came out of an innovation day. So you know, we say it's a way for us to give things back, because obviously Jadu is an enterprise product. It comes with a license fee, but these sorts of things, for us, sort of help us to gain a bit of exposure in the developer community, and give us that warm feeling.
Orbit, what does that do?
It's basically a SaaS framework, CSS SaaS framework. That's as much as I know about it. So Manchester City Council, just to give you a quick overview of the council and the sort of the work that we do where we go into these organisations. We don't try and sell software. The end result might mean that we're putting it on a platform or a piece of software, but that's not what we're trying to do. Local authorities are hugely challenged by having lots of big budgets cuts. They need to save money. And as you can probably look at, if you look around the UK, they aren't particularly great experiences, unlike the Jadu powered ones. And a lot of the focus is always on what the council wants to impart on their residents or business users, rather than what it is the users want to do. So 3 years ago, Manchester approached us and said, we've got this lovely site, it's been live for 2 years, but we've seen this huge uptake in people using mobile devices. They're one of the first cities to get 4G. They've Wi-Fi enabled lots of their public spaces. All of their public transport has free Wi-Fi on it. And of course, paying council tax, finding your local library, those sorts of things were things that people were starting to do on mobile devices, but their site wasn't responsive. And they had a Ouija app, but it wasn't really, for them. So we came along, and when I first met the customer services manager, and that was the other thing as well, the people that we've started to now work with are customer services people, not the IT people. When I started at Jadu, it was very much the IT people that were buying CMS platforms. Now that's shifted to customer services. They said we'd actually spent more money on chairs in our call centre than we have on our website for the last 2 years. So that kind of gave us, well, you're not really investing in the web platform. So we did a piece of work to help them identify what those transactions people were doing. How could we then digitise those? And a lot of them might start with a website, but they'd have to be connected to various CRM systems, payment gateways and things like that. And we focused on what we call 16 top tasks, which you can see on the Manchester site. Those change all the time, because what we've noticed is the behaviour of people doing something on a desktop is different to that on a mobile device. So those services will change. They also are cyclical in nature as well. So if you go and look at the Manchester site around Christmas time, it's all about bins and waste collection, because that's what people want to do. When's my bin being collected over Christmas? But when we went into Manchester and we started talking to them about this, there was about 30 people around the table, and these were different service heads. So we have revenues and benefits, we had waste, environmental people, we had marketing and comms, and they were all kind of vying for space on the homepage of their site. And when we overlaid Google Analytics on top of their existing site, they also had the leader of the council, Sir Richard Lees, wrote a blog every week. And he thought that was really important, needed to be really prominent. When we overlaid the Google Analytics, 0.01% were the click-throughs. So we stood in this room and said, why is it there? Why is it in such a prominent position? And we didn't realise the leader of the council was also in this room. And he kind of said, well, that's my blog, but I take the point. And he conceded, and that then kind of brought the people around the table to thinking completely differently. Well, let's come at it from a user's point of view. We also found some hideous content on the site as well. They had about 6,000 pages, but they also have about 400 content editors who are managing these pages. So every single department has a web team, essentially responsible for content. They had a guy in their environmental department that had written an encyclopedic entry on the life cycle of wasps. Don't know why, but if you search for wasps, it actually came up second next to Wikipedia. So we kind of challenged them a lot about their sort of content that they had on their site. They also had this system called Lag and Knowledge, which if you ever ring your local authority and you say, I want to know about this or I want to know about that, if say 10 or 20 people do that, it basically creates a task for someone to then put that item of content on their website because they think it needs to be there. So we also found the directions to IKEA on their website. Now, why you just wouldn't say go to the IKEA website and look at their directions, I have no idea. But somebody had created a page and had to maintain this content on their site. So it's ridiculous. They also had some really broken customer journeys. And what we've tried to do with Manchester is, and on all of our customers, is get rid of what we call council speak. They have a very sort of way of terming, what they think are their services. And there was one particular user journey. So if you had a recently deceased relative and you wanted to find out where they could be buried, the user journey was communities and living, parks and recreation, because they're the people that looked after cemeteries. So anybody in the frame of mind would never find that piece of content without searching. So these are sorts of things that we come and do. It's basically looking at the disparity between what their users are wanting and what they think they need to impart. One of the other things as well is we always take what people are searching for against their top popular pages. So planning permission is a big thing in Manchester. And on their previous site, they had a page that was serving up planning information, but it had a 90% bounce rate. We then looked at what the top searches were on their previous site, and planning was one of their top searches. When we looked at the page that the Google result returned, that page only had 9% bounce rate. So instantly we thought, well, that's the page you should be having as your planning page. So it was this sort of work that we were doing with them. From this, we've got some nice big stats. In the 9 months after launching their site, they saw a 50% increase in form submissions. So this was people reporting things to them previously that they'd have to go in and talk to them about or do over the phone. And with those same transactions, we saw a 35% decrease in telephone in calls to the same transactions. They're now doing about £2 million a month in terms of transactions. But when you sort of basically work out what they were saving from not having those people answering those calls and being in the call centre, that equated to £500,000 in 9 months. So that's the sort of business case that we generally go in with our customers. It's not always that big because obviously different local authorities are, working with a different demographic. And that was the other thing as well. So, the thing that became the most talked about thing on Manchester is, the icons are lovely. Can we have the icons? And there was a real reason for the icons. It wasn't a trendy thing. It wasn't because we were trying to make it look like an app. It's because 30% of the population of Manchester, English language wasn't their first language. So we thought having something that was pictorially led meant that for those people that couldn't necessarily understand English that well, could identify a service from an icon. But what Manchester have been really good at doing is taking their digital brand and kind of distilling it offline as well. So if you walk around Manchester, those same icons are being used for service signposts all around the city. So if you get a piece of communication from the council about your council tax, that same icon's being used. And it's really helped reinform that kind of offline and online sort of unity of their brand, and has also helped them with their channel shift as well. It's not just local authorities that we work with. We also work with parts of central government, and for as long as I can remember, Jadu's been an agile business, so we build our software in an agile way. So we have agile teams. Has anybody heard of agile? Okay, lots of nods, great. Previously on Direct Gov, there were lots of Jadu-based transactions for things like filling in a new passport. They used our forms platform essentially. But then about 4 years ago, the Martha Lane Fox report kind of highly criticised what government were doing, and out of that was born a department called GDS, Government Digital Service. And they've kind of really revolutionised government services, and they've kind of consolidated everything onto GovUK. So there used to be Business Link and there used to be Direct Gov, and it's kind of all now under one. So these are heavy-weighted transactions that people were doing via the government site on a day in and day out basis. And so it was things like getting a new passport, getting a new driving licence, and they approached us and said, we've got this project to deliver employment tribunals. There was a policy-led decision to introduce a fee payment, which was quite contentious. Previously, if you wanted to take somebody to an employment tribunal, it was free of charge. There's actually a tribunal office in Leicester, you'd get your form, you'd fill it in, but then you were kind of pretty much lost in the system because there was so much sort of, abuse of the system. So if you'd been disgruntledly sacked from your job, you went to Citizens Advice Bureau, they'd say, well, start an employment tribunal process because it would probably cost the company more money to defend it than just give you some money to go away. And that was the problem with the system. So if you'd been sort of sexually discriminated against and you wanted to take somebody to an employment tribunal, you were kind of lost in this system. So introducing a fee meant that they kind of whittled all those spurious claims out essentially. But because it was a policy-led decision, it needed to be live at the end of July 2013. And they approached us in February 2013 with a big spec document that big and said, this is what we need to do. And we said, well, that's great, but it's probably going to take us 3 months to read that document and understand it. So why don't we start working with you in an agile sense? We'd never actually done it with a customer project. So it was a bit of a learning curve for us and them. They needed to have someone that was able to make decisions on a weekly basis about what we were building. So we took the important user stories and kind of built against those. At the end of every 2 weeks, we'd do a video of what we'd built. We'd show it to them, they'd share it with their team. They then come back and say, okay, that's great, we now need to build this. We built it in 18 weeks. And at the end of the project, we found out that the incumbent supplier had quoted them a year and a half to build it. And we then found out that we were 25% cheaper as well. So that's a great advocate for Agile. So it doesn't always work because the customer has to really understand what Agile means. A lot of it is time and materials basis. So you can't come along and say, here's a contract to build something, build against this, because that's not the nature of Agile. So if they're used to the fact that they can work with you on a time and materials basis, and after 4 weeks, if they're not seeing progress, they can just stop and start with somebody else. So that's their risk mitigated. Because of that, we got a nice quote. That was the best picture I could find of Chris Grayling. So he was the previous Lord Chancellor. It's now Michael Gove. So they have some interesting people in that role. But it's the first time that they've ever cited an SME in a press release from government. And it was basically the fact that a small business in Leicester had innovated a particular service. So the GDS themselves at that point hadn't delivered a service for the government. So we were one of the first exemplars to go live. Well, it actually went into alpha, beta, and then live. So it's a great, it's a great testament for us. But we see this as a bit of a kind of a curve for us. So one of my first jobs at Jadu was to go back to the LCB when we moved out. And I was telling Ben this story a few weeks ago, and we were told that there was a minister coming to the LCB to talk to some SMEs. And it turned out to be David Cameron, and we sat in a room quite bizarrely upstairs for about 45 minutes talking to him. And one of the things that we got over was the fact that we found it really difficult to work with central government because they work with big integrators, companies like CGI, who essentially have these big framework contracts, and then they kind of engage with us at the bottom down of the food chain. And of course, we're the ones that have a daily rate. They then sort of treble that, and that's what the government pays. And it wasn't really giving the government any kind of value for money. But after that, the government introduced a thing called the G Cloud, which is essentially a government framework that anyone can be on. So if you sell any kind of piece of software or service, whether it's user experience design, that kind of thing, you can be on the government. And it's essentially a store. It's like Amazon for government. So if you want to buy government services, you can go to this store and you can find suppliers. And I would reckon about 30% of our business now comes via the G Cloud, which is one of the other reasons why we're not so reliant upon having salespeople as well. And the contracting was done in 2 weeks. Previously, if that had been a central government department, that would have been 6 months, and of course, huge legal bill, saying you've got to do this and we've got to do that, and what if this happens? And basically, we go on this framework, we tick all the boxes, and then they start to work with us. So it's a real, efficient way for government to do business with small companies. So anybody in this room can be doing business with government. So we kind of break design into 3 strands, and this is where the separation of Jadu and spacecraft has really happened. So part of what we do is really understanding the user experience. So it's before we start any design, we kind of understand what it is we're doing, who we're doing it for, why we're doing it. A lot of that comes from data. So it's not necessarily analytics from a website, but it's data that the organisation has. It could be quantitative data, i.e. what are people ringing us about. It could be qualitative data about them doing surveys, what's your experience of working with the council. So we take all of that, and this feeds into our process. And this is really a process that we've defined over the last 3 or 4 years, and it's become the reason why, hopefully, that we've grown so much. And we now go and present this pretty much the same presentation, and we don't talk about software. It's less and less and less about the software that's underneath, that powering all this. It's this process that makes the difference. We've almost become agnostic in terms of our approach to software. Yes, Jadu is a great platform, but at the end of the day, it's a tool. There are loads of tools out there, and let's just use the tools that are available. So that's our kind of mantra. And for us, design's about solving problems. It's not about making things look pretty and sort of design without content is just decoration, really. And what we always say is at the start of the process, we know very little about the organisations that we work with, even less about their demographic, but by the end of this process, we kind of really understand who these people are. So we developed what we call a UX toolkit. Now these are, I'm not going to go through each one of these, but they're essentially banded into kind of research, planning, how we explore, we communicate, all the way down to how we test and measure. And we provide these as a set of exercises and tools so our customers can do these. So they're probably doing some of this already, but they can also get us to come in and facilitate these types of things. But it really helps us understand what it is we're doing and always have the context of what it is we're doing as well. All the way down to how we can set some KPIs up and measure and test. And we share this. So this is the thing that we open up. You can get all of the cards. You can just send me your email address and I'll send you the pack that we send out. But they're great little sort of tools to help people through a digital transformation service. And one of the things that we invested in over the last 2-3 years is helping our customers understand how the value of design can be measured. So we've invested a lot of money in what we call eye tracking technology, which I don't know whether you've ever come across it, but essentially it was born out of supermarkets, basically people wearing these glasses, looking to see where people looked. But the same technology is now being used to track what people do on websites. And it's basically a little device that looks like something that you stick on top of a TV when you've got one of those sort of PlayStations with a movement sensor. But what it does is it tracks people's pupils. And it's not necessarily about the design process that we're validating the look and feel. What we're validating is the structure of the content. How has the organisation done something? And you only really have a very small amount of time, particularly on a council, to actually convince somebody can do something on a website. If they can't do it within 2 or 3 minutes, or even less than that, they give up and they pick up the phone. And that defeats the object for local authorities because then they're having to pay for somebody to answer that phone. So this is a quick video of somebody using a service on Edinburgh City Council. Now Jadu and Spacecraft didn't actually design this. They had a local in-house team design it. But what we wanted to do was come in and help them validate their user journeys, essentially. So I'm just going to play and sort of stop this at a few key points. So what we're seeing the user do is essentially each one of these blobs is where their pupils are landing. And if you're sort of used to user experience on the web, everyone does this thing called the F shape, which is how they scan around the page in the F shape. And this kind of really reinforces that. Now the task that these particular people were being given was to report a missed bin collection, which was one of the most popular tasks people were ringing the council about. My bin's not been collected today, when's it going to be collected? So you come onto the website and the user's looking for something, they'll focus on this, but the bit that they're looking for is in a second menu, so they're going to finally click on the thing that says more from bins and recycling. Again, this is the exciting stuff that we do all day long. So they eventually hover on this, they'll realise what they're looking for is not in that menu, and they'll click on the more options. They'll then get to this page. Now, what we learn from eye tracking, again, is that F-shaped behaviour. So to optimise this journey a tiny amount, what Edinburgh could have done is taken the things that were in that first list and not repeat them. So what they've done is basically those 4 items that were in the first list they put to the top left. What they should be doing is taking the things that are missing from the list and put those to the top left, because that's where people are going to naturally look for. So this task is now all the way down here. So what we're watching is somebody scan around the page, and this is sometimes frustrating because you're sort of willing people to go to the bit of the page. Eventually they'll realise where they need to click. Yeah, they found it. Now when they get to this page, this is a bit of a mess now, so I'm just going to switch to a different view. So some of the data that we get from the eye tracking software is based around where people look. So we have a thing called a cluster diagram, we have a heat map, and then a gaze plot. And I'll explain what these are. So we ran this with 20 participants, and every single one of them were only looking in that area. So if one person had have looked all the way down there, that polygon would have drawn a big sort of triangle down there. Now, of course, the link to do that task is there. So the content editor at Edinburgh thought, what we'll do is put a load of instructions, then we put the link right at the bottom. Everybody uniformly missed it. They focused on this thing, which was a link to when the dates of when bins were being collected in their area. So what that tells us is nobody bothers to read instructions. They only focus very quickly on these areas here. So these white blobs are indicating the areas of the screen where they could actually discern any readable copy because they were scanning around that quick. So the evidence that we then take from this, well, let's put the button in the most obvious place. So if you now look at this page, that's where the button is. So then we can take that evidence and translate that to every single comparative service that has a transaction in a similar way. The instructions are still there, but of course nobody's going to read them, so we put it in the most obvious place. We're only saving or shaving a few seconds, but those few seconds really count. What we also get is a lot of feedback from people using the eye tracker because they don't necessarily verbalise what they're doing, but they give us a lot of information with their eyes. And we can also track their emotion as well. So the eye tracker works to track their pupils, but we also invoke the video camera in the screen, or they can use their own device. And what we're looking for is two states of emotion. One's frustration, one's accomplishment. So if you're using something on the web, we all do it, we can't help it, and we've not been able to find something, we start to frown. The eye tracking software realises that's frustration. So we can see when the user's getting frustrated because they can't find something. Then when they click on the right button, their eyes will open up, and that's accomplishment. So we can track and improve our services because of that sort of approach. But we've also now started disseminating the design process using eye tracking. So what we do is we will take a brand, distill it down into things like typography, colorways. This is a bit of an extreme example, but what we will then get the user to do is just look at this page for 10 seconds. We won't ask them to tell us anything, we'll just say, look at this page. And hopefully what they will do, and this is the consensus that we get, they will gravitate to the one that's the most legible. Same thing with colorways, same thing with how sort of fields and forms will look. And then what we can do is take that evidence, so i.e. the heat map of where people are focusing, and start to use those elements as the design for the new site. So when people then come across and say, why is the site, sort of this colour, why is this button red, why is it over here? We can say, well, here's all the evidence based upon that, which is hugely important for local authorities because at the end of the day, their councillors are answering to their residents, and a resident would say, oh, this new website's crap, why is it not doing this? And the councillor will say, well, here's the evidence, basically, it's user-based evidence. So we've just recently launched City of York's new website, and they published all of this in a blog called Rewiring York. And it's really illuminating because, essentially all that evidence that they found, they've kind of shared with their users. So there's been no big bang reveal at the end of the process. It's a great way to kind of distill the design into distinct parts. And again, it's not just about us doing what we say is our gut instinct. It's about using some evidence and some real data.
Can I ask one quick question?
Yeah.
On one of the previous pages, you had a button there.
Yep.
You placed at the top. Now, if you click on that button, what happens? Is there a light box or?
No, they can then go to a form to report that service. So on a mobile, for example, the form's enabled to use their GPS positioning. If it's on a desktop, they just fill in where it was that they're living. What we're also now seeing is councils are being a bit more proactive than that because they have the technology particularly for bins. So inside the cabs of bin lorries is this communication system that tells the council where they are. So they can say, we weren't able to pick up 90 Packhorse Drive today because there was a car in the way. So when the customer comes in, if the council know who they are, i.e. they've got an account, they can say, sorry, your bin wasn't collected today. So it's a bit more proactive. So they're the sorts of things that we do as integrations end to end. But essentially it is a form just to report.
And how does that button compare to an actual form embedded on that page?
There is some argument that having a form within that page is better for user experience, but the problem was with Edinburgh, their forms package isn't powered by Jadu and it's a separate system, so they have to go to a separate page. We can't embed those forms, unfortunately, but there are some sites that we do. And that's pretty much it, really. That's kind of my talk over. So I don't know how I'm doing for time. Probably ran over quite a bit. But any questions? So, we're quite fortunate that we are the go-to people in the UK for local authorities. In the US, we have a business which is based upon partners. So we partner with a company called Lexmark, who basically sell our software as part of their toolkit. And we've done some integration with one of their student management systems. So there are universities using Jadu. And again, another reason why we don't have salespeople, we have partners doing that selling. We're also in Australia as well. I forgot to mention that at the start. I should have mentioned that. It's quite important. That sounds quite glamorous, but basically there was one guy, his wife was a teacher, they got a visa to go in Australia, and we thought, well, rather than losing one of our great people, he can set up Jadu Australia. They have a very similar structure to the UK in terms of local authorities. He's been there a year and he's now won his 4th local authority, and they don't have any aversion for buying from Brits either. They're kind of quite happy to do that, whereas in the States it has to be a US company, which is why we partner with people. So the problem is because our market in the UK was purely focused on local authorities, the products kind of become a local authority CMS, but it's it can be anything. So Jadu's strategy is really to separate those two entities. So the core of the software is maintained by an engineering team, and the delivery and the deployment of the software is managed by Spacecraft essentially. But now we've become a bit more agnostic to software, so we'll be selling open source systems, because there are customers that say, we don't want a licensed product, we want to go down on Umbraco or Drupal. Currently we're not in those opportunities because they think we're just so wedded to Jadu. So that was the strategic thing for those things, really. With eye tracking, you can kind of prove or disprove lots of design decisions. Amazon is probably the most widely used e-commerce site, yet it's really bad from a user experience point of view when you apply eye tracking to it. So one of the sort of big drivers for councils at the moment is to introduce advertising on their site, because it's a revenue stream. And what we've been able to prove is that people have advertising blindness. They see an advert that's jarring from the branding of their site, and they will ignore it. So it's better for them because what they do is they sell local advertising rather than sort of mainstream advertising. So it's better for them to create something that looks like an integrated part of their page, but is actually an advert for something, and that gets more click-throughs. So you can use eye tracking really powerfully, and I wish I'd have had it sort of 5-6 years ago, because I'm sure we would have won some, bigger customers at Untitled as well. Hamburger menus, one of those popular things, really bad when you're doing eye tracking. People just don't understand them. So a lot of this helps drive our design decisions, but it doesn't necessarily compromise what we're doing. We still start with our gut instinct, but then we test and measure it, and we try and prove or disprove it. And that's the benefit of it, really.
Do you think hamburgers on the way out then?
I like them, but I'm a designer. But from a usability point of view, they're pretty bad. From an accessibility point of view, they're terrible. Right. Accessibility is not just about sort of the way that the colours work. It's how somebody can tab around the page if they can't, if they don't have any hands, for example. They're the sorts of things that we have to sort of, include in accessibility. And hidden menus are pretty poor for things like that, particularly on council sites.
Do you work exclusively in Agile methodology with all your clients?
We try to, yeah. So our software is delivered Agile, so we have Agile teams. Because of the nature of a lot of government contracts they are contracts, we have to deliver something against that. We try and iterate the process inside Jadu, so we deliver what they need us to do. So, delivering a big content management system for a local authority is usually, pinned around the fact that they need to migrate content from one system to another. So what we would do is deliver elements of the CMS. So so document pages, landing pages are delivered against their content editors doing that work, and we do that in an agile sense. But everything that we do is kind of pretty much documented and sort of sent to the customer at the end of every week. But we kind of work internally with Agile, but there's only a small amount of local government customers that really understand what Agile is. It's more central government that understand that and have that mantra. It's been difficult. I think Jadu's got to a certain size by more luck than judgment. And it's kind of, we've tried a lot of the things over the last 4 or 5 years to make that step to grow again, and they don't work. So then we come back and we try again. And, the splitting of Spacecraft and Jadu is another thing that we're going to try. Jadu needs to stand on its own 2 feet in terms of a CMS platform. We don't want to compete with its other partners. I think the secret is that we have had always that division between who maintains the software and who delivers the software, rather than that being blurred. Because once that becomes blurred, every kind of custom dev that comes along just becomes a custom bit of software within the CMS. Whereas our core developers that maintain that say, no, that's in a separate repository, that's completely separate. None of our other customers are going to use that. And I think that's what's kept that consistency. And previously at Untitled, I would go, well, just do it. Just build it. But now we have that very kind of structured element of this either is in the core or it isn't the core. If lots of customers want it, it goes in the core of the software. If not, it's a custom dev.
It sounds like you were originally, right at the beginning, perhaps more kind of techie-led and have become much more customer-focused. Maybe that's your...
I mean, you know, we had a very early conversation when I was still at Untitled, and I was quite unhappy. I owned the company, and it was that much of a bad place to work. I didn't want to work there. So I had the ability to leave. But the idea is that we'd always do this agency. It's just taken 5 years, that's all. And I think a lot of it, you know, we have had there's been this kind of separation of cultures within Jadu. So the engineers are very well looked after. They have really nice desks. They get all the nice air on chairs. The people downstairs in Jadu, I know you don't understand, but we have 2 floors. The people in spacecraft, you know, it looks more like a scruffy LCB design office, you know. And the engineers have no phones on their floor. And somebody described it, it's basically like watching Songs of Praise with the sound turned down. It's not a great place if you're a verbal kind of communicator, which is designers are. You know, if you're an engineer, software engineer, you need to be in that space. And they kind of very much work 9 to 5, whereas what we do, it's kind of, you know, more flexible. So that distinction between the 2 elements within Jadu has kind of brought us to this conclusion of let's separate it completely. But, you know, from my point of view, I was only ever interested in, I don't want to own a software company. I want to work and, you know, work with customers and have the diversity of working with different customers as well. And that's the bit I enjoy.
What's the interface between the 2?
Slack. Basically, we use a tool, so nobody really gets out of their chair and goes upstairs, very rarely. We used to have a sign on the door saying, do not enter. So Slack's the channel. And a lot of those engineers don't really like talking to people anyway. You know, they just like typing. So Slack's the interface, really.
You mentioned innovation days. What do they look like?
Basically, we come up with some challenges, engineering challenges. It might be customer-led. It might be, you know, we want to deliver this SaaS framework. A couple of people come and present on what the challenges are, and then they break off into teams. So you have the UX element, you have the sort of front-end devs, and then the engineers and the testers. And they basically create like a virtual agile team for that day and prototype something. So they're writing code, a lot of sort of pair programming, that kind of thing. But it's, you know, it's actually created a lot of stuff now for Jadu that we can use ourselves. So, you know, we encourage that quite a lot. You know, we try and have them every 3 months, and it's an important thing, I think.
You began by pointing out that you're Leicester born and bred. Has Leicester been important to Jadu? Could it have been anywhere?
It could have been anywhere, yeah. I don't know the reason why it started in Leicester. I mean, at Untitled, my previous agency, we almost used to apologise for being in Leicester when we first started. But then as we got bigger and we started working with bigger brands, it was kind of like, well, you're not paying London agency prices, you know, you're actually getting good value for money. And of course, our staff can all afford to buy their own houses up here. Cost of living's a lot cheaper. So that's another thing. So
you're unsighted by the motorway? That's where you're positioned?
Yes, yeah. It is difficult employing people. People want to go and work in London. We've created some good relationships with Leicester Uni. We do a lot of their career fair things. When I started, we had 2 testers at Jadu. We now have about 20 testers. So testing, because of the agile nature of what we do, has become really prevalent. A lot of those people come from Leicester University.
Just when you were talking about the bin lorries, it made me think you're in quite a prime position to capitalise on the smart cities initiatives. Yeah. Have you got an idea to take that forward, because you can manage all that data and content?
Yeah, I mean, there's a big kind of thing about what's called a government as a platform. So rather than councils having all these disparate back office systems, so revenues and benefits will have one, planning will have another, you know, sort of waste environmental will have another system. It's basically enabling all of that via the website. So there's been a big shift in local authorities investing in CRM systems where they think, you know, it's important to have what they call the golden record of the customer. So one place where they can see everything to do with the customer. The problem is people don't interact with their local authorities that much. They want to either report something, they get in and go out really quickly, or they want the more kind of involved multi-agency support because it's important. So one of our customers is Rotherham, and obviously I don't know whether you know about Rotherham, but they're under a huge amount of pressure, particularly on the social services. they're investing a huge amount in technology because they see that as a way of bringing all of that disparate information together, and hopefully, we're in a bid at the moment, all underpinned by Jadu. So there's a lot of revolution going on in government. A lot of it's born out of the GDS sort of, banging the drum and saying this is the way to approach design. But I think, what I've learned over the last 3 or 4 years can be, taken and, put into the commercial sector. The fact that you've not heard of channel shift, the fact that we sell our platform not because it's going to make somebody money, because it's actually going to save them a shed load of money. That's a completely different way of thinking. And I think, the commercial sector could benefit from that. I think the Jadu story could work trying to sell that to commercial organisations, to saying, what are your expensive channels of communication? How can you turn those to be online? So I don't know whether that's answered your question exactly, but yeah.
What do you think Leicester as a city could do next to help firms like you have the success that you've had?
I think attract talent, really. That's the key thing. Again, didn't mention it, but we've actually got our own talent recruiter. So we used to rely on a lot of working with recruitment agencies, and we now employ someone that's ex-recruitment agency, and her job is totally just to find talent for us. So we've got this constant stream of people. So I think, bringing, the universities have obviously made a big difference. When I was at Leicester Poly, there was just a handful of buildings. Now it's De Montfort unis everywhere. That's made a lot of difference because obviously you have a lot of people here. Sometimes we've had, difficult internal discussions about when somebody started to get quite successful at doing something. We're not trying to own the IP for anything, even though we've essentially employed them. We just think it's a way for them to have that kind of 5:30 mentality, where after 5:30 they've got their own thing. I mean, I do music, but that's my thing. I'm never going to be a pop star, but it's the thing that keeps me sane in the evenings, and everybody needs that. And that's encouraged. So, but it's everywhere in the company. It's not just the developers. So one of our sysadmins, so obviously we do a lot of hosting. We use a thing called Openstack, which is a way of building virtual servers. He's actually built something else, particularly around our requirements, that now we're thinking, this could be a product. And we're now going to, invest in that and, turn it into a product, but open source it. That's the sort of mentality we're trying to drive, really, rather than, this ownership and...
Excellent.
Yeah, it sounds brilliant, doesn't it?
Have many people left because they've got, they've developed something that's been so good?
No, we've had people leave because they want to go and work, Silicon Triangle, whatever it's called. And we've had people that, have come to Jadu and think, oh, this is a bit scary because I'm kind of left to do what I want to do, really. There's my stories that I need to build, and I can do this. But some people thrive in that situation, and some people don't thrive in it. And those people tend to come and go very quickly.
Yeah.
Do you have many remote workers, or do you oblige everybody to work on site?
We do, yeah. We have so we have a Leeds office. It's basically the equivalent of the LCB, but in Leeds. So we just rent, some hot desking space. And that was because Leeds University is one of our customers. They had a couple of people that worked inside the uni, really loved Jadu, wanted to come and work with us, so we kind of just employed them, essentially. One of our designers is in Exeter, the other designer's in Cornwall. We then obviously have Australia and US. One of the benefits of having Australia and the US is that we're moving towards 24/7 support. So we're going to have engineers being able to support our platform in Australia and the US. So that means all of our customers will benefit from that, following the sun around the world and supporting people.
Sorry, one question. Is if you actually get to the point where you're employing people who are users of Jadu, actually started that, are you actually thinking of moving to a done-for-you service where you're actually almost actually providing staff that can actually do that content management, being Jadu specialists or trainers becoming Jadu specialists, and actually then provide those staff to say a local authority?
Yeah, so it was interesting because I very rarely go out and visit a lot of our customers because I've kind of been internal for a long time. And when I started going out, I went to South Lanarkshire and I walked into this room, and every single member of this team had Jadu lanyards on. They were the Jadu people inside the council. So if anybody wanted to do anything that was remotely web-based, they're the people that they went to. And that's a massively powerful thing. That's a brand within a council. And those skills are transferable, so they basically get themselves better jobs in other councils that are using Jadu. So there's definitely that community there, yeah. But we need to grow that more, which is why, you know, the separation and building that diversity.
But there was a freedom of information request to Leicester City Council saying, how much does your website cost?
Yep.
And it came back refused. We don't know.
I'll tell you the reason why, it's because it's open source.
Right.
It's based, I think they're using Umbraco. And some councils, and again, this is also the challenge for us, so there's a big mentality of rather than buying expertise, rather than buying a solution, they're buying expertise. So they're buying people that can develop, people that can do the design, and they get people to come in, they build something. But of course, a lot of them are contractors. And then the cost of it kind of doesn't really, you know, when somebody comes and says, how much is Jadu? Well, that's the license fee. That's how much they pay to implement it. That's the support cost. It's very easy. But if, you know, but a lot of councils that go down the open source route, oh, God knows how it costs. You know, we have no idea. Birmingham City Council, famously 5 years ago went out to procurement. Jadu lost it. They went down the open source route. They then spent £5 million delivering something, which they've just thrown away and bought Jadu. They bought Jadu at the beginning of this year, which is not live yet, and it's for an absolute fraction of what they paid for originally. Then Jadu wasn't so tried and tested, you know, it's probably more of a gamble. Now, because we have so many local authorities, it's less of a gamble. People don't get fired if they buy Jadu, let's put it that way. But yeah, you know, that's the thing with local governments. You know, it's you can do an FOI request, and you know, we have some competitors that do that. To find out when their contract's up for renewal. You know, it's not a particularly nice way of doing it because it creates the council a whole amount of work. But there is a company, organisation called Socketim, which is a society of information technology managers, and local authorities can subscribe to this. And what they do is they run conferences and insight, but they also do what they call the Better Connected report, which is where they basically review all the councils to the UK based upon a number of key services. And they also do the software register as well. So basically people can be a member of Socketim and find out who's got what, when it's up for renewal, that kind of thing. Because it's public information, it's all freely available.
Well, you did mention figures when you were talking about channel shifting, and you were saying £40 for person to person. Then where do those figures come from?
They're basically supplied by the council, so they know the cost to employ somebody sitting in a chair with a phone with the lights on.
They would individual councils.
Yes, yeah,
right.
Yeah. But whether you're in Manchester or whether you're in Wigston, those costs are pretty much the same, and that's where they can realise those savings by moving to a digital channel. It does mean people are losing jobs, but they're going to lose jobs anyway because the council have to cut back. Cheers.